Good evening. I'm Joe. He's Nick. And sitting across, well, not really across from us, but diagonal to us is our guest, Mike Patton. And more on Mike in a minute, but you are in the combat zone with, I already said it, right?
Yeah, you did.
With Nick and me.
That's right.
And Mike Patton.
Is it Nick and me or Nick and I? I never know when to use a me or I.
Okay, depends on whether you're the subject or the object. So this is it, okay? Think of it like this. If there's a verb, as in, I'm going. So if Nick and I are going somewhere,
right,
then it's I. But you don't say me going somewhere. So you don't say Nick and me going.
Okay, so we're sitting here discussing, so can I say that Joseph and me are talking about?
No, that would be Joseph and I.
Okay.
Is your mic on, by the way, Nick?
It better be. I lifted the little button.
Okay. Yeah.
Otherwise, this is a futile conversation.
This is a good opportunity to apologize for that big blank space from last week, where Nick went on a rant, and it was actually a pretty good monologue, Nick. But
I thought so.
Unfortunately, yeah, it didn't work because your mic was off. And
speaking of mics, we should let him say hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Say hello.
Hello.
Okay, we got that out of the way.
Okay, so Mike...
That may be the last you hear of me all evening, but hello.
Oh, I have a feeling that won't be true.
Yeah, Mike Patton is a communications guru and a big supporter of Donald Trump and Doug Ford. So for all of you Trump and Ford haters out there, our number to call is area code 844, toll-free anywhere in America, in North America, I should say, 844-415-2115. That number again, 844-415-2115. And you can also chat live if you check out the player and click on the little talk bubble in the player. You will have to log in. You have to, if you're not logged in, or if you don't have if you're not registered with this Spreaker, that's the platform we use. Just register. You won't get emails and all kinds of stuff from them.
It's really easy. So. Even I could do it.
Right. So you get to chat live and make your comments or whatever. Okay. So lots of stuff going on this week. We always make this big list of things to talk about, and we never actually finish them.
Well, I actually posted them this week.
Yeah.
Yep, I put them up.
Well, don't you usually post them?
Sometimes.
I
try to, but if I think about it.
Is it time for a break yet?
We just got started.
Okay. This table is terribly crowded.
Well, we keep putting more stuff on it.
Yeah, and we're not divulging our location either.
We're just in Studio B. That's all anybody needs to know.
No, don't tell people that.
Well, we could be in Studio A, but we're not. But we're...
yeah.
Anyhow...
Yeah, don't tell people in Studio B, because then they'll go, well, you were in Studio B.
Speaking of which, did you hear about the serious fire in Wakefield last night?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I did, but go ahead and say it.
Well, anyway. It was a very serious fire. The guy with 2 wooden legs burned to the ground. I'm sorry. I've been giggling over that for 2 weeks.
You probably can't say that on terrestrial radio.
We're not on terrestrial radio.
No, I know that. It's probably one of those, the broadcast standards. What are
Which don't apply here. I love
Bureau or whatever?
The broadcast, the Canadian Radio Broadcast...
broadcast
CRTC.
Standards, but I don't. No, it's not CRTC.
No, the CRSB or something like that. Canadian Broadcast Standards Council.
Right. That's it.
CBS,
like that.
Whatever. Who cares? They don't apply to us.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not worried about it.
All right. So mass shooting in Toronto.
Yes. This has, and Mike, if you want to jump in on this, please feel free. In my estimation, this has the hallmarks of a terrorist attack. I felt that way from the beginning. And when you watch this unfold, when you watch the video, everybody says mental illness, as if that's an excuse. Well, first of all, and they have admitted this in the press, a lot of mental health professionals have said, look, the vast majority of people who have mental health issues do not pick up a Glock and walk down the street shooting people at random. That's not how they solve their issues. If they do get help, it's always done in a clinical setting and things like that. This guy, I don't think he was mentally ill. I think he was just following the directions that he believed his version of Islam gave him, and that is, if you don't think like he does, if you don't believe that he is, then you are disposable. That's his version of Islam. And ISIS today announced that they are taking responsibility for what happened. My attitude is, if that's the case, because ISIS has made it very clear they want to kill us. They're not messing around. They've made multiple attempts to do as much damage as they can, so let's take them at their word. And let's go after them like they mean it. Stop pussyfooting around and take this threat seriously for what it is. And it's about time we stop talking about gun control and start talking about the assault upon us, which is coming from an entity whose whole mission in life is to either conquer, subjugate, or kill us. That's my attitude about it.
Mike.
I'm waiting for somebody to jump in here.
Well, we will see. There's not enough information, I don't think, in the public domain yet to have a clear understanding of whether it was a mental health issue or whether it was terrorist driven. Because I would expect certainly that there would have been some sort of associated video or postings explaining what he was going to do. This is very traditional in the jihadist movement. I'm going out the door now to shoot a bunch of people in Toronto. And a video associated with that is very common. So some sort of domestic claim of responsibility is usual. And it is true. It is true that the overwhelming majority of people with mental health issues don't deal with it in a violent way. But there are people who just lose touch with reality, believe that the world is against them. And how do you shoot a 18-year-old woman who's just graduated from high school and sitting out on a patio, having her dinner, shoot her once, and when she hits the ground, step over and shoot her in the head if you're not mentally ill? Like, that's hardcore. It just, I'm not sold on it being a
okay, well, here's how I answer
attack.
that. Because if you look at the Fort Hood shooting, Major whatever his name was, he wasn't mentally ill. He did not put out a video saying, I'm going out the door to do this, okay? He calmly paid off his lease, closed down his personal affairs because he knew what was going to happen. He picked up his weapon and he went around and he killed a bunch of people. He did it in what we would call cold blood, but he was acting on what he believed, and I'm stressing that point, what he believed that his version of Islam was telling him to do. So there's nothing insane about that. And
Right.
I look at this the same way, that he wasn't mentally ill. No, maybe he was, but it wasn't the mental illness driving him to this.
And we will see. See, the other issue
I'm not so sure we will.
Well, I think it will become clearer. The other issue is, can somebody who has mental illness and delusions already watch the news and pick things up and in their delusion say, that's what I want to do? Is that a jihadist attack or is that a mental illness thing?
Okay, I will allow. I'm not going to be so hard-nosed about this that I'm going to reject any possibility. That's ridiculous.
Mental illness is not an excuse. Let
No,
me be very clear.
we both
about
agree on that.
That's not my point. But there's a difference between an a paramilitary assault and a crazy person with a gun.
Okay, I will grant that. What I'm saying is that there is a chance that what you're suggesting is true. I'm not completely excusing that, but this sure looks like has all the hallmarks of a traditional ISIS attack, because they don't do the grand attacks anymore. They do small ones scattered around.
And all I'm saying is that there's not enough information, in my opinion, to come down conclusively one way or the other.
Now, the other question this raises, and we'll get to gun control in a minute in general, the other question this raises is, are we going to be told the truth by our security forces and the media? Now, I listened to a report today out of Toronto, and it's very bland and very non-committal about what they knew and how much they knew. Like, did we ever find out all the details, or how long did it take us to find out the details, if we ever did, about the shooting in Quebec?
So here's the problem. The problem, as I see it, first of all, the whole discussion about mental illness, I think, is irrelevant. Whether the person is mentally ill or not is irrelevant to whether they had a motivation that was, if you want to use the term, jihadi. So I don't care whether the guy was mentally ill or not. But the real problem is the changing face, the changing nature of terrorism, and the fact that a group like ISIS doesn't actually plan attacks. What they do is they're very much into social media. They're very much into internet online stuff, and they produce material that captures the attention of certain people, and they encourage these people to go out and do things. Whether that was the case or not here, I don't know, but it's very possible for a group like ISIS to do the kinds of things that they're doing, call it indoctrination, but it's not indoctrination where you're sitting someone down in a classroom and
it's not the same kind.
You're tying them down and you're forcing them. And this is really the changing face of terrorism. So the quote-unquote lone wolf terrorist who is motivated as opposed to recruited, trained, and then sent out on a centrally planned mission. So, I actually am one of those people that doesn't get too caught up in the characterization these days of whether it's terrorism or it's not terrorism. The fact of the matter is the guy went on a shooting spree. He shot a number of people, killed a couple. Whatever his motivation was, whether he was mentally ill or not, the measures that you have to take to protect people from that kind of attack are precisely the same, whether it's terrorism, quote unquote, or not.
Or a simple madman.
But there's a huge difference, because terrorism has to be motivated by some sort of ideology. Take a look at the van, the guy, the person who ran all the people down in Toronto with the van. That was not an ideological attack. That was, and I don't know if it was you could categorize it as a mental illness thing.
See, that
was not jihadi. It wasn't.
But we never heard the final word on that. This is why, if you look at what's going on in Europe, just as an example, there are all kinds of cases where the press and the government refuse to acknowledge or accept or tell the truth about what's going on because they don't want to offend a certain segment of the population.
There's not the same pressures here. I don't believe that. And the same thing, the Las Vegas shooter that was up in the hotel. Okay, he was not. There's no evidence that he was ideologically
I agree with you there. I'm not trying to tie him into that.
I'm just trying to separate. Terrorism is violence for a political point, for a political purpose. That's what terrorism is, and as opposed to either crazy or just bad people. I think that guy in Las Vegas might have just been a really bad dude.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing with that. In the case of Vegas, I never suggested that there was any terrorism going on there. He was just a lunatic. He was just somebody who thought he had an axe to grind, and this was the best way to do it. Maybe he didn't like country music. I don't know.
Okay, our guest is Mike Patton in the studio with us tonight. And Mike, is it okay if I say that you were the former communications director for the Minister of Public Safety?
Yeah, well,
I mean, the subject here is, I didn't say it before, but the subject is really right up your,
it is
your,
relevant,
your alley.
from my time in public safety. So I do have a little bit of background in this, and there's just a profound difference, because yes, there is a difference in how you handle them, because there is, as Joseph mentioned, there is a real problem with indoctrination. And what's very interesting, especially here in Canada, because it is different. There's a different dynamic in Canada than there is in the United States or in Europe. And the perception in Canada of young men, especially who are Muslim, who, whether they were born here or their parents immigrated or they were born abroad and came here as children, the perception here is that they can become pretty much anything, that they're not barred from a large section of the economy. They can become wealthy. They can become doctors. They can become lawyers. They can become police officers.
You see them in every trade and occupation in the country.
And you need to understand that, especially in Europe, and this is even prior to the big migration, there was a huge issue, because rightly or wrongly, and it was more often right than wrong, if you were a young Muslim man, your ability to advance within the country of your birth if you were born in Europe was very limited. And there was a disproportionately high level of unemployment and lack of hope, which doesn't exist in Canada so much. So the nature of the problems here are different than Europe, and they're different than the United States.
Okay, so with that said, the question is, regardless of the motivation for this particular shooting, it's being used as a catalyst to regulate firearms.
Right.
And is that the best response? My answer is absolutely not.
Well, but if the only information that we have, which he had pre-existing mental health issues,
right,
is correct, he either obtained the firearms
illegally,
like he bought them on the black market, or somehow he fraudulently
apparently from what the latest I saw was it was his brothers who had his own set of mental issues.
Right. So the question is, we've got very good gun laws in this country that try to keep, especially handguns, away from people who
shouldn't have them.
Would obviously be wrong to have firearms.
So
we don't let children have them. We don't let people with violent criminal pasts have them. We don't let people with mental health issues have them.
Somebody on the terrestrial radio, when I was listening to this topic as I was driving around today, made a point. He said once you get a restricted firearm and allowed to own, and I love that term, the government allows you to do something, but to own a restricted weapon, be it a pistol or some kind of a restricted weapon, that gives the police carte blanche to walk into your house anytime they want to without warrant and take those things from you. If you get into an argument, if you have some kind of, let's say you're downtown one night, you have one too many, you get into a fist fight, they can walk in and take your weapons because you were involved in a violent offense.
Okay, right. Yeah, but let's not go down that road.
I'm just saying that we already have. What I'm trying to say is that we already have really restrictive gun controls, and all we do by adding to that pile are punish law-abiding gun owners.
Okay, so that's the real question. I think the real question when it comes to gun control and what has been really an explosion in gun violence in the city of Toronto so far this year is, where are these guns coming from? And it used to be that most of these handguns were coming in from the States, but more and more of these guns are actually legally owned guns. They're being sold on the black market. So you have two responses. Can you come down on people who own guns legally and then sell them on the black market? Come down heavily on them, or ban handguns altogether, totally. And there's no ban, but right now, but they're very heavily restricted.
Right.
So, in my view, what you really have to do is you have to come down really hard on people who own the guns legally, and then because they need the money or whatever, they sell them on the black market. And I say, if that's the case, and my understanding is it wasn't the case in this particular shooting, but if it had been the case, I say that whoever originally owned those guns has to have some criminal responsibility for what happened, because not just the fact that they sold the guns in the black market, but that the guns were used in this crime and that the crime killed people. And in the States, in several states, they have this principle called felony murder, where even if you're not the killer, if you're involved somewhere along the line in the crime, in the conspiracy, in the planning, in the execution of the crime, even if you didn't actually pull the trigger or commit the murder, you can be still charged with murder. It's called felony murder.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying is, okay, rather than going after the majority of handgun owners, and let's be frank, that they're not a whole lot, okay, of handgun owners in Toronto or in Canada. There are handgun owners, but it's pretty restrictive, okay? There are a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get your license, to get the firearm, to transport the firearm. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're doing everything legally, okay, why should that person or those people be punished? I say the real problem is that you're not coming down heavily enough on those gun owners, the legal gun owners who then sell their firearms in the black market.
Well, what about, I hear you, and I think that I'm not necessarily opposed to that, because you are like if you lend your car to somebody who goes out and kills somebody with it, there's a certain amount of culpability there. I don't see this as being a whole lot different. But at the same time, what about having when somebody, like, let's say this guy wasn't killed in the shootout, and that he doesn't have a mental history. For some reason, he just loses it one day, walks down the street and shoots a bunch of people, and they manage to catch him alive. What should his punishment be when they get him into the court? And how lenient should we be? Should we allow that to be plea bargained down to something else,
because
like we do with a lot of other crimes? Is that
because of his alleged mental illness?
No, I'm saying that if this guy, I'm taking the mental illness off the table because they'll say, well, he's not criminally responsible if he's got a mental illness.
Potentially.
Yeah.
And that defense works very rarely. Like the number of not responsible because
I don't
of
want it to work at all.
illness.
Well, I shouldn't say that. That's not true.
You've got to be able to form some sort of intent. So there is a legitimate reason for it, but these things need to be dealt with very seriously. But the reality is there's two issues here. First of all, there's more than a few handguns in Toronto. There's tens of thousands of legal.
Yeah, he's talking about legal ones, though.
Tens of thousands. Tens of thousands of legally
That many?
owned. Yeah, tens of thousands.
Okay.
Of legally owned
I stand correct.
handguns
That
in
surprises me.
Well,
but
actually, it doesn't. Well, you got a population of, 6 million people.
Yeah,
It's not that hard to imagine.
Yeah, it's not
Okay.
that. It's
Yeah,
not that
maybe.
many. But this is not a case of somebody who it doesn't appear anyway. Somebody who legally went out, purchased a handgun, went through all the hoops. So making illegal acts more illegal makes no sense.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
To say this this is a case where somebody inappropriately had a handgun, which is illegal.
In and of
we
itself.
we should double that. We should punish people who didn't do anything wrong. And it always angered me. One of the things that angered me about the long gun registry, it's not deer rifles. People aren't holding up convenience stores with deer rifles. These sorts of things don't normally happen with hunting weapons.
They do occasionally, but
They do occasionally.
Well, we had that shooting a few years ago in Wilno, and that's what he used.
And for sure. And he was hunting though.
He was hunting women.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was hunting, and we don't. There's.
I don't want to go down that road too far.
But the point is, making things more illegal makes no sense, and punishing a group that has no history of being associated with this sort of crime is inappropriate.
So you're talking about legal gun owners.
Legal gun
Yeah.
owners. Now, if you are a legal gun owner, especially with handguns, you are required by law in Canada to store that in a gun safe. You can't just stick it under your pillow.
Right.
Right? Like that's
that's
okay.
unsafe storage of firearms.
That's right. You have to store, which is not only a reasonable law, it's good practice anyway. So if your house was broken into, it should be difficult to get a hold of those firearms from the safe, because normally it's bolted to the floor and they're not going to carry it off, and they shouldn't be able to. A bunch of teenagers shouldn't be able to get into it. However, if your firearms are stolen, that should be reported immediately.
It has to by law.
Okay, if your firearms all turn up at a crime scene and you have sold them on the black market and cannot show that they were stolen from a proper gun safe, like you should show the gun safe,
Ripped
cut
open.
Yeah.
Or the
Then
lock
you
picked or something.
I have no problem with seeing you, going to jail and making big rocks into little rocks.
That's my point. That's exactly my point. My point is that rather than talking about banning handguns, which are already very tightly controlled in this country, I think that what you should do is you should ensure that the penalties for not storing them properly or for selling them on the black market should be severe. And even to the point where whoever originally owned the gun and disposed of it that way shares in the culpability, the criminal liability for the crime that was committed.
Yeah, there's some nuances like that you could play with a little bit. Like if you were in a rural setting like I am on the farm, I don't want to have to go through 4 sets of locks to get the old lead slinger out to deal with a bear in the backyard. But when it comes to handguns, I'm not picking up a handgun to take out a bear anyway. I want the .308 or I want the shotgun with the slug. And to have an allowance to say, look, you can have it in a cabinet and something like that, you don't have to have, padlocked and chains around it and all that stuff.
But you don't. A proper gun safe has, one key or one combination.
Yeah.
You should have reasonable access to it.
That's right. Even the idea, like I know that I won't name anybody, but I know neighbors of mine who have a shotgun behind the door behind the kitchen door. It's been there for generations.
Right.
Because of that, when predators come in and go after cattle, if they don't want to have to go to the gun safe and then grab the ammunition and reload it all, they have the shotgun sitting there and they're ready to go.
Come on, be serious. They're not worried about bears. They're worried about driving away the OSPCA agents.
Well, them and the Conservation Authority maybe, but I'm kidding on that front. But coyotes, bears, wolves, things like that are their main concerns, and they want to have something at hand.
But that's not Toronto.
No, it's not Toronto, and that's why I'm making a distinction.
If you live off the Danforth, in Toronto, you're not worried about coyotes.
Well, you think they're cute. You don't think they're a predator.
There's no reason in Toronto not to have your
something. When it comes down to owning a handgun,
safe.
I don't care if somebody wants one. For me, that's a good enough reason, as long as they're going to treat it with respect and abide by the laws. If somebody if you're a collector, just like people collect stamps or coffee cups, for every item on the planet, there is somebody out there who collects them.
And I saw John Tory say, why does anybody in Toronto need to have 10 guns?
See, that's the wrong question.
And I'm like, well, that's not the problem.
That's right.
It wasn't a case that he had a duffel bag full of firearms and he had one. What difference if somebody has 10 or 1?
Right.
You're only
firing one at a time.
And this is a totally separate conversation, and that is that, often what ends up happening is that the left, if I could use that term, takes advantage of every instance of crisis, if you will, in order to move forward with an agenda that they already have.
Right.
And the fact is that, God bless John Tory, but he's no conservative.
Not even close.
And notwithstanding the fact that he was the leader of the Conservative Party in Ontario for a
in
period
name
of
only.
time. So, they don't like guns on the street, but making them more illegal than illegal is not going to change anything. And here's the other thing, okay? So let's say you get this problem of owners of legal firearms selling their firearms in the black market. And I don't know how big a problem that is. I'm just assuming it's a problem because I've heard it is. But so you get that under control. Great. But you're still going to have the problem of illegal firearms coming up from the United States as well. So, how do you deal with all of those things?
Well, ask yourself this question.
So just let me finish the thought, okay?
Okay.
Again, I think that part of the problem is that I don't think that our courts, our judges, are hard enough on criminals who use firearms in the commission of a crime. And I don't even care whether you shoot somebody or not, or whether you shoot, period, whether maybe you don't even shoot somebody.
If you use let's say you want to knock over a gas bar and you pull a pistol, that should add 10 years to your sentence automatically.
So this is a problem with the courts in, totally separate subject, with the courts not following mandatory sentencing.
Yep.
And whether or not mandatory sentencing is in fact constitutional or not. That's a subject we'd have to get into. I don't know whether we'll do it tonight, but that's a totally separate subject.
But think about
punish
this.
criminals.
But think about this. Where do you think the biggest holes in our border are when it comes to the passage of illegal goods?
I don't know.
Native reserves.
Sure.
When was the last time you ever saw a raid on cigarettes or contraband by the RCMP at a border crossing at a reserve?
Yeah, well, you're not going to get an argument from me.
That's because you can't. They don't do that.
Yeah, well, I think that that whole system is.
But it doesn't matter. Like that is a hole that is just there. But the reality is that the United States, a number of politicians in the United States were looking at if it was a good idea to build a wall. And not again along the Mexican border, but along the Canadian border. And this is a number of years ago now. And it was really an employment thing. They wanted the money. They wanted the federal government to invest billions of dollars, create all sorts of jobs. They didn't care about the wall. They cared about the jobs. And that's what they were really after. So there was a study done. The Canadian government and the American government put their law enforcement people and said, how much is really being smuggled from Canada into the United States. How
Or
many
the other way around.
Well, or the other way around. And what they found was very little was going from Canada into the United States. Far more was going from the United States into Canada, including people, including firearms, including marijuana.
Right.
Okay, guys, we're going to have to stop there for a second. Hold those thoughts. We're going to go for a short break, a couple of minutes, and we'll be back, as I said, in just a couple of minutes.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. I'm Nick, he's Joseph, and the guy to my immediate right is Mike Patton, who is a communications guru and a huge fan of Donald Trump and Doug Ford. In the second hour of the show, after we get done this next half-hour segment, we'll be talking about Trudeau, Trump, and trade. And it's going to be a lot of fun. There's a big announcement to be made. We'll tease you a little bit to get you to hang around.
Well, the announcement was made already.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about the announcement where Trump lands a huge deal, a free trade deal with the EU.
No, don't say that.
Well,
you're supposed to be
you just said the announcement
people,
was
not giving it away.
Going to be made.
Okay, everybody should know that. Well, maybe not everybody. See, I didn't know that.
Well, you know
we
now.
Were talking about it just.
Don't you want to know the details? Well, you're going to have to wait till after 10 o'clock to find that out.
Okay,
there you go.
Now people are turning off their computers, going, "Okay, these guys they don't make any more sense. It's too mixed up."
If they're just turning it off now, then if that's the reason, they would have turned it off a long time ago. Anyway, so what we do want to talk about is the idea, the announcement today out of Toronto, where Doug Ford has fulfilled another, or is in the midst, is a more accurate way of putting it.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. Cause...
In the midst of introducing legislation to kill cap and trade here in Ontario, which is a huge promise he made on the campaign trail. So this is like 5 or 6 major promises he has dealt with and fulfilled. So he's setting records from that point of view, a politician actually doing what he said he was going to do.
At this rate, what is he going to do after Thanksgiving?
Trust me.
If he's
looking for suggestions,
every single promise he's made, is he going to just send the legislature on vacation till...
You know how much money he'd save us if he did?
Well, they're going to have to go on vacation anyway because they're sitting through the summer, right?
Right. So I say, it's not much longer, I don't think.
Okay, so I say, give them work through August, and then go on vacation until after Christmas.
Yeah,
and then come back.
Bring him back in January
and call a snap election.
You want to reduce the Liberals to zero? Is that what your goal is?
So I stand to be corrected here, but I believe that the Ontario government, that this legislation is the first instance of a legislative body in the Western world actually taking official action to roll back the, I'm trying to think of the right words to use, the environmental...
The enviro-wackoism?
The what?
The enviro-wackoism?
Enviro-wackoism?
Yes. I'm inventing words here on this show.
That's pretty good. It's what's really good is that I was able to repeat it without...
Well, you came up with the term climate catastrophist, so I figured it was my turn to come up with something.
Climate catastrophism.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, did Donald Trump not climb down from the Paris Accords?
Okay,
the American commitments?
So yeah, he did.
But that's not legislation.
It's well, that's right, because there's certain things that he actually can't do without legislation. See, this is the thing everyone's got to remember about the United States and their constitutional system is that the president actually doesn't get to do a lot of the things that he wishes he could do, and vice versa. So, but the thing about the Paris Climate Change Accord is that there was actually a cooling off period in reverse. So, if you decide you want to withdraw from it, he did announce that the United States was going to withdraw, but sorry, you got a little psyched out there because I thought, oh no, is my mic on?
No, that's what I was supposed to worry about.
I know, everyone started looking at me. I'm going, what, is my mic on? Is my mic on? I actually did a show, on election night, I went like a whole portion of the show without my mic.
Well, I know what that feels like.
Yeah, I know you know what that's like. So anyway, so there's a cooling off period, like a cooling off period in reverse,
So
meaning...
if it's climate change, is it a cooling off period or is it a warming up period?
See, that's why you were giving me that look.
I was waiting to jump in.
He's just looking for an opportunity. He didn't want the beginning of his sentence to interrupt the middle of yours.
No, that's actually kind of clever.
It's
that's
a
why
warming
you're
up
a
period.
communications guru.
That's why they pay him all that money.
Yeah. So anyway, the point I'm making is that Trump announced that the United States was going to be leaving the Accord, but that doesn't happen immediately. There's a period of time before they actually get to leave. Mm-hmm. So it's not straightforward, and I don't believe that there's been any kind of legislative action on that. But I do know that there are certain things that, you're right. The Americans have been rolling back some regulations, for sure they have been, but this is very big, and it's leading edge. It's right out leading the world, at trying to restore some kind of balance and sense to our approach to protecting the environment.
Well. And Mike, you can speak to this too. But one of the things that drives me crazy is if you are a climate skeptic, which is the name we get tagged with, and I'll gladly wear it when it comes to man-made global warming, which is the original phrase, and I refuse to use any other because that's what they called it. And the fact that it isn't working out that way doesn't change the fact that that's the name tag they stuck on it when this whole thing got started. But when you say, look, I don't believe that man is causing the planet to heat up through his activity. All of a sudden, you hate the environment. It's as if just that issue alone throws everything else out the window. Because I like to talk about, let's deal with real problems, environmental problems, like pouring raw sewage into the Ottawa River, as an example. Shutting down landfills and putting up energy from waste plants and extracting the energy they contain and turning them into cheap power. There's all kinds of things we can do that would make the place a more healthy place to live that don't involve throwing billions of dollars of treasure down the chute, never to be seen again, for something that might happen 80 years from now when we have real issues going on today. Why don't we deal with things like dirty water in places like Attawapiskat or some of these there are about 80 or 90 boil water advisories on different reserves across this country, and nobody seems to be lifting a finger to do a thing. To me, that's a real environmental issue, and we'd rather worry about how much carbon dioxide's in the air, which we don't have a whole lot of control over anyway, and if we did, it would be a bad thing. They'll ignore that because they can go to sleep at night thinking, I did my part, but it didn't cost me anything. They don't see the cost to it. This pause is for you guys.
Pregnant pause there.
That's.
No, you were on a roll there. Keep going, Nick.
Well, this is the kind of thing that when I run into these progressives, I don't like the term lefty because that's too arbitrary. But progressives who run around saying, we got to stop the planet. The oceans are going to rise. Well, if they were going to rise, they'd done it by now, first of all. Secondly, the oceans haven't risen more than half an inch in the last century or an inch or so. I mean, when you and I were in the Navy, Joseph, we knew where the high and low water tide marks were. 10 years ago, when I was back to Halifax, when I spent 10 days on the Athabascan, the same high water marks and low water marks for the high and low tide were in the same place.
Yeah, you see, I wasn't worried about 1 or 2 inches sea level rise. I was worried more about those 1 or 2 story waves.
Yeah, those two. Yeah, those were a lot more worrisome. Like 30, 40-foot waves are no fun. But the point I'm making...
you haven't lived until you're looking up at the wave.
Yeah, I've done... I have a clear memory of that just before it tried to throw me overboard. Anyway, I'll tell that story some other time. But the bottom line is they lump all environmental concerns into this one issue, and there's no room for talking to them about anything else. They'd rather waste all that money on something they have no control over than actually deal with real problems like raw sewage in the Ottawa River, as an example.
But it's even a little bit more simple than that. Doug Ford ran on a number of promises, and he was elected democratically.
He certainly was.
So does he not now have a mandate to enact those promises? And that's whether you agree with his point of view on climate change or disagree, whether you agree with his point of view on sex ed or you disagree, or any of the other issues that he ran on, he was very clear on what he would do. He was very clear that there would be no carbon tax in Ontario. He was very clear that the sex ed curriculum would be rolled back and there would be a new process to identify a new curriculum. So does he not have a mandate to go ahead and do that? Is that not the democratic thing to do at this point?
You would think so.
Well, that's actually, the point you're raising is very important, Mike, and that is that, we talk about democracy, we're always thinking about what you get to do when you win. But really, just as important in the democratic mindset is what you have to do when you lose. And when you lose, you have to lose graciously and say, okay, the people made a choice, and we have to respect that choice. And more today, people are in our society, and in the United States especially, are simply refusing to accept the outcome of the democratic process. And I actually think that's a dangerous thing.
You see that in the States with this whole anti-never Trump movement, right? Trump won fair and square, no matter what Hillary will tell you.
And he keeps winning.
He's
winning every day. Donald Trump just keeps going from victory to victory.
And okay, this is a good time to remind people our toll-free line anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115.
Yep.
844-415-2115. I just wanted to say that, for the Trump haters out there.
And if you don't agree with me, please call in. I'm happy to educate you. It's a public service. I'm happy to live up to that. But so
Mike's thinking about getting his name changed to Trump.
That would be my
Trump Jr.
Name. Yeah. So
Trump Patton.
But here's the thing to think about as well. So Doug Ford clearly ran on an agenda and received a mandate not to permit a federal carbon tax in Ontario. Now, the federal government has the authority to do it. They don't have to wait for permission of the provincial government. They have the taxing authority to go ahead and do that. However, Doug Ford's got the mandate. The federal Liberals do not have a mandate to do that in Ontario. Should this be something? Should they have to hold off now until after the federal election? Go to the people of Ontario and say, fine, if you still want this, vote for us. Well, if you don't want this, vote against us.
They won't say that.
Well, they won't, because they'll end up with the 7 seats that the provincial Liberals
They saw what happened in Ontario.
Sure.
And that's why the more premiers that come on Doug Ford's side and say that we're not going to do this carbon tax thing. First of all, why do you have what they call a revenue neutral tax, which is the government takes the money away from you and then runs it through the sticky machinery of government and then gives it back? Why take it in the first place? I've never understood. The GST was supposed to be that way. The carbon tax is supposed to be revenue neutral. If you've got a revenue neutral tax, all you're doing is creating a new administration and finding the money to run it, and then giving the excess
at the macro level.
Fair enough. But that's
if your aim is to influence people's behavior, then what you do is you tax the behavior, and you can still be revenue neutral, and you distribute the revenue more widely. Generally,
so it's a communistic
behavior.
Scheme, wealth redistribution.
It is to a certain degree, yeah. There's no question about that. Listen, I'm not defending the carbon tax idea. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that's sort of the
logic
rationale
behind it.
You do targeted taxation.
That's a problem. We got to get rid of that kind of thinking, because unless you have a very specific need for a tax. And we talked at lunch today about a tax I think needs to go, and that's the one on the license plates, that little tag.
Here's Nick's pet peeve.
You got it. Drives me nuts. I won't get into the details, but canning that tax, okay, because it was nothing but a cash grab in the first place, is to me a big issue.
Yeah, but what does a pack of cigarettes really cost?
I don't know. I don't smoke.
$2, $3?
Oh, really cost? Yes.
Really cost? Maybe it costs $3. I guarantee you, if you started charging $3 a pack for cigarettes, a lot more people would go back to smoking.
Right. and think of the revenue the government would
it's a
make.
sin tax.
Well, they wouldn't, because if you went back and took the taxes off.
No, but
part of the reason they were successful in reducing the number of people who smoked was because of the taxation on it.
Well, Mike Harris put the boots to that because he wanted to end the smuggling that was coming across the river and across the Great Lakes.
Well, that was a separate issue, but yeah, you unintended consequences. If you put too much tax on a pack of cigarettes, that creates a market for smugglers. That's right.
That's right. So,
and it's the same thing for too much tax on labor. You create a whole underground economy.
Okay, but getting back to the environment.
yes, that's where we started this.
Let's because I think that this is a huge issue, and I believe that conservatives, whether you're talking provincially or federally or even conservative-oriented municipal politicians, I think that if they were more robust and more assertive on rolling back the environmental hyper-regulation or promising it, I think that would be a very big winner for them. Here was an example of Doug Ford, who ran saying we're going to get out of cap and trade and there's not going to be any carbon tax. And it didn't hurt him one bit in Ontario and probably helped him.
Oh, I don't doubt it helped him.
I think it's an example that there's a constituency out there, voters, there's a pack of voters out there who are primed to vote on this issue. They're tired of being told that, getting in their car and driving to work in the morning and driving back home or driving the kids to hockey practice or whatever is destroying the planet. Especially if you're Canadian, where we have such a minimal, almost negligible impact on the environment, and that's assuming that some of the things that we do are actually contributing to, quote unquote, climate change. So I think that this is a huge issue, and I wish that more conservative politicians were prepared to get out there, climb onto this bandwagon, and say, it's enough. We're not worried about climate change. We're worried, as you said earlier, Nick, clean water, clean land, clean air.
Yep.
Let's get the basics taken care of first. If we're going to spend money, that's where we should be spending money. It's fundamentally wrong for us to be involved in shipping money overseas in some abstract, esoteric chase for, reducing carbon emissions at the same time that people in Canada can't drink the water that's coming from their wells because it's contaminated.
Just a minor tangent. We went out to lunch today.
Yep.
We all ordered water.
Yep.
There's no straw in the water.
I noticed that.
Oh, don't start on that.
No, but it is relevant in the sense. So here's what's interesting about that. So that was a political decision.
Yes.
By that restaurant not to put a straw, because straws are ending up in the ocean.
Yeah, like our straws are going to make it to the Atlantic or Pacific.
And again, there is a chain of events that happens when you use a straw, and it goes in the garbage. Whether it goes in the garbage or it goes in the recycle bin. But Ottawa straws don't end up in the ocean.
I know.
Well,
that's
you
the lunacy of it all.
You can argue that too many of them end up in the landfill if you choose. You can argue that they're not, because I don't think it's recyclable plastic anyway. I think it's got to end up in the landfill. Well, but the point is, that's not where there's lots of plastic in the ocean. But it's not coming from you. It's not coming from us. So why is there this big movement to get you to stop using straws that could never have access to the ocean?
Because we have to set the example. We have to do our part. We have to be leaders. And you know
it's
what?
It's very frustrating to me.
It is. I'm sick of that argument.
Because especially there's a number of European countries. There's a number of the United States is a big one where they've shipped waste plastic to certain countries to deal with. And instead of dealing with it, they just dumped it. Well, and that's how the stuff ended up in the... But there's only 3 or 4 real access points that cause plastic to go in the ocean. We know what they are.
Well, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to repeat what I said then. Okay, the first step to reducing plastic straws in the ocean
is take that straw to the turtle's
dumping
nose.
them in the ocean.
But we don't. That's the thing that's so funny. In Canada, we do not dump And we do not export plastic in the same way.
First of all, we also have to change the way we look at plastic and what it's good for. First of all, most plastics are not suitable for recycling. Most things of any quality at all have to be virgin plastic.
I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. My point was simply that that was a political decision by the restaurant, and they're free to make it if they want.
Yeah.
If they don't want to, if you asked for a straw,
had I been thinking of it, I would have specifically asked for a straw.
And you can do that as well, but the government is not forcing them yet to do that.
Yet is the key word.
Well, and nor should they. If you on the farm in Killaloe want to put up a windmill to generate electricity for your farm, go right ahead.
As a matter of fact, that's exactly...
I don't have a problem with that.
No, and I'm on exactly the same mind. I don't care if my neighbor wants to put up a windmill and solar array to help power his farm. I don't care. He's not asking me to pay for it.
But don't bend the economy,
right?
And say we will subsidize it so heavily that just by purchasing the windmill and purchasing the solar array that never has to be plugged in, that you will turn a profit. That's sort of warping the economy in a way that's not reasonable.
So why do people or organizations or companies decide that they're not going to do straws?
Because
for example,
of political attitude, the attitude of the consumer, the public attitude about an issue, which is driven by what I think in many cases is at least misleading, if not outright incorrect information.
I don't think the public cares, generally speaking. This is one of those things where if you ask them, do you care about straws in the environment? The majority of people may answer yes, but if you give them an open-ended question, say, list the 100 things that you care the most about that we need to deal with.
Yeah, straws
in the ocean are not going to show up in that list.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And so people do it, okay, so that they get to give themselves a pat on the back and say...
it's virtue signaling.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right? Look at how good I am. I won't use the straw.
Yes,
Now, let me tell you, okay, if you haven't done this yet, okay, go to YouTube and look up substitute straws, because there are actual you could get your own personal substitute straws, and there are videos on YouTube now where they're rating the different things, and I'm telling you, man, they have there's the paper wax paper straw, and then they have bamboo straws, and my favorite, the stainless steel straw that you carry around with you in your purse, if you carry a purse, okay? So, it's...
you could jab somebody right in the eye with that.
Yeah. Well,
don't go to England; they'll take it from you.
If you're in London, they're going to ban those pretty soon because they're dangerous weapons.
Well, imagine trying to get that on a plane.
Well, you'd never get through the metal detector.
I don't know if you can.
It's a straw.
Yeah, but they won't look at it. Believe me, they won't look at it that way. You can't even bring a big tube of toothpaste with you. What chance has it got a stainless steel straw going to give you? So, but this is, again, more of that kind of inane lunacy that passes for environmental, feel-good, fuzzy, I'm going to hug the planet today mentality. And it's the kind of thing, one of the things I try to do in my daily life, and most days I'm not successful, but I try, and that is to run it based on 3 principles: common sense, logic, and reason. And if there's no common sense in it, I can't see the logic in it, and there's no rational reason for it, then we're not doing it. And yet every single time I turn around, we run into more people worried about a plastic straw stuck in a tortoise's nose or a sea turtle's nose than clean water for our own people here in Canada. Yeah, do these people never connect 2 sentences together and say, wait a minute, I see a problem here? Look, I feel for the turtle, but pull the straw, let it go, and we'll go back to what matters. This kind of stuff just makes me crazy.
Don't sugarcoat it, Dick. Give it to us straight.
Oh, buddy, believe me, if I was using a language I want to use, they would come shut us down.
It's the internet.
Yeah, I know,
it's
but
not regulated yet.
I'm afraid there's a van out there with a locator.
But they don't know where we are.
Yet. If people don't get it after that, then just... And because you run in, and a lot of the people who support these kinds of things are very good, warm-hearted people who have the best intentions. They just don't think something from beginning through to the end.
But listen, I don't care. This is a free country. You're entitled to be wrong.
Yes, you are, but you're not entitled to oppose that wrongness on me.
Well, but you're entitled to be wrong. The difference is between you being wrong and the government being wrong and forcing me to do something.
Well,
if you want to do something that's wrong, for the most part, like you're just wrong. But if you then convince the government to impose that upon me, that's a bit more of an issue.
That was Jordan Peterson's big argument about what words he could not use anymore. He said, "You're not going to tell me what words I can use in the English language to address somebody. That's never happened in British common law history, and certainly I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen now." That's what got him started. And obviously we all know what happened after that. But, excuse me, it's that kind of mentality that we're faced with. You can't tell somebody, like if you were to say, I think that transgenderism is a mental issue, and that if you are suffering from thinking that you're a woman in a man's body, you need to go see a shrink. All of a sudden, I'm anti-transgender, and I'm the problem, not the guy who thinks that he's a woman in a guy's body and wants to have the physical alterations done to himself to make him look like he's a woman in a woman's body.
But what's interesting? More people know who Caitlyn Jenner is than know who Jordan Peterson is.
Yeah, but that's changing fast.
I don't know.
My God.
I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, but I think his appeal is very limited, and very few people know who he is and what he believes in.
But he's making a lot of money on YouTube now, I think.
He sure is. He has the number one bestseller in the world. His 12 Reasons book is number one world seller worldwide.
And he was in Ottawa yesterday. Or he was at Centrepoint Theatre, but the ticket prices were like ridiculously high.
Well,
and I have no problem. Listen, if you can get it, that's fine.
That's my attitude.
I was just
how much
they were like $150.
Well, how much is that compared to going to a concert to see the Rolling Stones?
He's not the Rolling Stones.
No, I know, but that's not the question.
God bless him, he's not.
I wouldn't walk across the street to see the Rolling Stones.
Oh.
Now I'd pay the $150 to go see Peterson, because he has information I want.
Right.
And to me, it's worth the $150.
And you can get it off YouTube.
Okay, so we're going to go for a break. I guess it's about 2 or 3 minutes, a little over 3 minutes, maybe closer to 4, actually, for this break. Yep. So get up, stretch your legs, get yourself a cold drink, and then come back and settle in for hour number 2. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone. I'm Joseph. He was Nick, but I'm looking at an empty chair there. He's obviously off trying to find some alcoholic beverages to drink. I'm not really sure. But I'm here with Mike Patton, our guest, and we wanted to start off the second hour of our show talking about Trump, Trudeau, trade, and the European Union. Oh, here he comes. Nick is back.
I'm looking after our guest.
Okay, Nick's back, and he's looking after he's got a picture of something, but it's not a refill for my drink, I don't think. Okay, let's forget about that. Is your mic on, Nick?
Yes.
It is now. And that's
yes.
Okay.
Well,
really a very pink, fruity-looking drink.
You just lemonade.
You just do what you're doing there, Nick. And
yep.
Okay, so the big news today is that, well, Mike, you talk about this because you were the one that brought it to our attention.
Well, sure. I got to see the press conference between Donald Trump and I think it was the head of the EU who visited the White House today. very concerned because there's been so many trade and tariff issues between the United States and Canada, and the United States and Europe as well, on steel and aluminum and retaliatory tariffs. So the head of the EU went to the White House to meet with Donald Trump, and they came out into the Rose Garden with a deal. So all the tariffs are pretty much off. Steel and aluminum, no more tariffs on European steel and aluminum. All the retaliatory tariffs are gone, and they've come. They still have the details to work out, but essentially no tariffs between the United States and the EU on any manufactured goods.
Okay, so bang, take that, you Trump haters.
Oh, man, I'll tell you. You know
Even
something?
I'm surprised.
Yeah, well, I had this conversation today on Facebook, and people were complaining about the way he handled himself in Russia, right? How he seemed to appease Putin and all this. But think about this. He just landed this deal, and Mike was sharing some of the details of it with us before the show. They are going to be shipping vast quantities of liquid petroleum, natural gas. Yeah, like LNG, liquid natural gas, to Europe. They're going to use it to heat their homes with.
It's part of their deal, right?
That's
part
right.
of the deal was
that hits Russia right in the pocketbook.
The United States promised to be one of the major suppliers of liquid natural gas to the EU.
That's huge.
And that doesn't just hurt the Russians, you know. That hurts us in Canada, because that's a huge market now that we are not going to have access to potentially.
But we're not in that market anyway. We're not shipping liquid natural gas.
We should be going to Asia with it.
We should be going somewhere with it.
Yeah.
We can't even get it to Ontario, for Pete's sake.
Well, yeah, no kidding. But the brilliance of this move is it shows that while Trump, I liken him to somebody who is, I won't call him the court jester. That's not fair. But he acts like, you know, he's got a million different things going on. He says some absurd things. He throws a lot of dust and smoke in the air. But underneath it all, he's got all these schemes going on. And when everybody's looking over there, what's going on in Russia, he pulls off this EU deal. And all of a sudden, everybody goes, well, how did he do that? Because you were paying attention to Russia. And what he was saying there, you weren't watching what was going on behind the scenes. This guy isn't stupid. He didn't become the prime minister, the president of the United States by being dumb.
Okay, our number to call is 844-415-2115 if you want to join in by phone. And if you want to get in on chat, just click on the little talk bubble in the player and log in. If you haven't logged in, or if you can't log, if you're not registered, register and then log in, and you can chat live. And Nick's watching attentively.
I am.
So there it is.
I've got the Facebook up, and I've got the chat up, and I've got the combat zone up. I mean, I'm loaded for bear. So here, let's talk about the position that this puts our glorious leader, the used sock salesman, in. After his
Kim Jong-un?
No, our glorious used sock salesman.
Is
the
he
prime
the
minister.
glorious leader or the illustrious leader in North Korea?
Probably both.
Okay.
You notice he has stopped calling him the Rocket Man, right?
So
call him the Rocket Man
so
anymore.
if he's the illustrious leader, our leader in Canada is the lackluster leader.
Yeah, and
I'm
the only job
struggling
he's
a
really
little bit
qualified for is
something
to sell
witty
you
to say.
socks.
Have you noticed?
What's that?
I said I'm struggling for something witty to say.
Oh, well, just leave that to Mike.
So two things take away as far as Canada's concerned. First of all the trade issues that we're having with the United States, the Europeans have solved. So where does that leave us? And that puts an awful lot of pressure on the Prime Minister, because this is a puzzle that has a solution. Donald Trump is a puzzle that has a solution, and the Europeans found it. So you can't say he's just irrational, because somebody has sorted out the problem. And the issue of steel and the countervailing duties that we put on all sorts of manufactured products, from whiskey to Harley Davidsons, is no longer necessary if they can find the solution. That's number one. Number two, it still comes back to NAFTA. Where does that leave us with NAFTA? Because that is sort of rolled off the table. We were very close to getting a deal in Quebec City. The sticking point was the 5-year sunset clause, which the Prime Minister said was a deal breaker. And at the time, Donald Trump said, listen, it's not a big thing for me. The sunset clause is not that big a deal. If that's the only problem, I will waive the sunset clause and we can get a deal today. And then he left. He got on Air Force One, and the Prime Minister went out and did a press conference, and he said, well, I will not accept anything less than getting rid of the Sunset Clause, because he knew Donald Trump was going to get rid of it. And Donald Trump blew a gasket, quite rightly. He's watching this on TV and said, I thought we had a deal. And you're throwing me under the bus.
I love his line. Does he not think Air Force One is a TV? We got 21 of them in here. How did he think I wouldn't find out?
In fairness, it was a little puzzling because, he actually probably would have benefited from actually explaining that was what had happened. But instead, he didn't say anything, and his trade people went out and started talking about a special place in hell for people like Justin Trudeau, which may or may not be true. I don't know, but actually there was a substantive issue here, and nobody talked about it.
But it's not the Prime President of the United States' job or his staff's job to explain to the Canadian people what happened at that meeting in Quebec. That's the Prime Minister's job. But he should have walked out and said, "We have a deal, and here's why."
Okay, but he blew it up. Okay,
he sure did.
That is to say, Trudeau blew it up.
Yep.
And I'm not referring to terrorism or jihadi stuff.
No.
Okay?
We're talking about politically blew it up.
So Trudeau blew it up, but he wasn't going to go out and say we had a deal and I blew it up. So I really regret that the administration in the United States was not clear on what was the issue that caused them to be so upset.
Well, like I said, it's not their job. And if Trudeau had walked to that microphone and said, "Look, we just had a great meeting with the president, and the president and I have agreed that the sunset clause is no longer on the table, so we're going to be moving forward with some kind of agreement or arrangement," Trump would have been happy as a clam. No reason to get upset.
Okay, but he was upset because that's not what happened.
I know. That's my point.
Okay, so go out and say...
So the problem is Prime Minister's, not the President's.
Okay, but it's not up to Trudeau to explain why Trump is upset, because it's Trudeau that...
Yes, it is.
No, because it's Trudeau's actions that got him upset in the first place. So Trudeau's not going to go and say, well, I screwed this up, and, But
an apology actually would have gone a long way if he said, I got carried away.
But he wasn't going to apologize.
Trudeau doesn't apologize for anything.
I'm telling you, though, if you are a dairy farmer in Canada today...
You're worried.
Sell your quota.
Yeah, you're
worried.
Sell your
quota because it will be worth, not much.
Well, I'm hoping...
they're going to have to give up dairy to get a deal now.
Because here's what I'm hoping will happen, because there's a lot of really good people in the dairy industry, and I don't want to see anybody hurt. Because Joseph and I had the supply management conversation last week or the week before?
It was last week.
Last week, okay.
And your mic was on.
Yes, it was. And believe me, I heard a lot of feedback. But my point is that they could grandfather this so that if you're 25 and you just bought a quota and a farm for $5 million, okay, which is not unreasonable if you've got any amount of animals at all, the government should say to you, okay, we'll buy your quota back, at full price. But if you've been in the business for 20 or 30 years, you're going to get a stipend because you've had 20, 30 years of an ability to make a profit off that quota, and it's not fair to pay you the full price after 30 years. The young guy who just stepped in and risked everything, we're not going to burn him. But you have had that kind of, couple generations to make some money on that.
There are ways to transition.
That's my point.
But the point I think that I would make, and I think that, not to speak to Mike or for Mike, but I think the point he's making is, the day is coming.
Yeah, he's right.
Inevitably, this is going to disappear.
And it's not the only.
And you're not doing yourself any favor by putting your head in the sand and pretending that somehow that Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer are going to protect your quota.
Because the opportunity for the easy deal is gone.
Yes.
Now he's under pressure, right? He has to make a deal because he's going to look bad. And Donald Trump's going to know that. So he's going to say, hey, how do I get the same deal as the EU? And Donald Trump's going to say, you're not getting the same deal. You have to sweeten it for me. You've got to give me more.
That's right. And if I'm a poultry farmer or an egg farmer, I'm worried about the same thing. Because those are all 100%. Supply-side management. Yeah. He's going to say you've got to get rid of supply-side management.
Yep.
Because what else could he offer?
And the tariffs. Get rid of the tariffs.
Yeah, okay, but the tariffs
are
that's
go.
easy.
That's easy. But it is, you're going to have to throw dairy So you're going to have to throw me dairy and poultry, and sucks to be you.
That's right. You should have. You should not have blown this up back and go back, and we wouldn't be here.
So what you're telling me is that there are going to be some dairy farmers out there that are going to have to give up satellite radio in their air-conditioned cabs.
Well, that might be the case, but I'm not willing to make them sacrifice. Like, I have ridden long enough on a tractor to know that those are creature comforts they've earned, because the alternative is no fun at all.
What, no satellite radio?
No cab. You spend a June day cutting hay on a tractor with no cab.
But you know, the farmers should be very upset because the lack of a deal when they had the opportunity to find some sort of a compromise or some sort of a phase-in program,
right,
will be lost to them now.
Yeah, they should be furious with Trudeau.
But they didn't want it.
I understand.
But that was then.
But they missed their window of opportunity as well, I think.
I get it. But
we can feel as bad as we want for the 25-year-old who just spent $5 million in quota that's going to be valueless. I feel terrible.
Yep.
But it doesn't change the fact.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that. This is a situation where it didn't have to be this bad. And because of bungling at the highest level in this country, it's going to be worse than they thought it was going to be. And that's too bad.
And God bless Andrew Scheer, but by him being on the side of must have quota and must have the subsidies, there was no pressure on the Liberals to do anything about it.
Well, there's pressure now.
See, this is another example of Conservatives not having the courage to stand up for some of the principles that you would think that they would be fighting for. And I'm saying that I use the word principle, okay, and I could make a principled argument, but the argument I'd really make, as I've done time and time again, is purely electoral. There is a constituency out there that will vote for you if you take a stand on these kinds of issues. And look, Maxime Bernier ran largely on eliminating supply-side management, okay, and he almost won the leadership because of it. Now, you can make the argument that he lost the leadership by a sliver because of this, but, you know, there are a lot of people that voted for Maxime Bernier in the Conservative Party because of the stand he was taking on this and similar issues. There's a constituency out there that are prepared, they understand, they've got common sense, they're not naive. They're not insensitive to the possible pain that's going to ensue by making these kinds of changes. They're difficult changes, but hey, the world goes on, right? I mean, you can't stop progress. You could try all you want.
Well, the most recent example we have of that is the success Doug Ford had on doing exactly that. Here's what I'm going to do, and this is what I stand for. Vote for me. And the results are historical.
And, you know, here's the thing. You're going to lose, if you take a stand on some of these issues, you're going to lose elections. I mean, that's inevitable. No political party is going to be in power forever and ever, okay? But I think that you're going to, as a Conservative Party, that if you take clear, unequivocal stands on some of these principled issues, I think that you win more elections than you lose. And at least when you win, you know, you get a mandate. You have a mandate for actually doing something.
But when was the last time a Conservative government lost because they stood on principle?
Well, they don't. But this is the point. That's exactly the point.
It's a false. You know what frustrates me is they say we don't want to stand on principle because we might lose, but it's never happened.
Well, but that's the point I'm making, Mike. That's exactly the point I'm making. What ends up happening is, you know, you don't differentiate yourself from the other political parties enough to have clear-cut choices in terms of policy. So what happens is you get the Liberals who have their policies and they do what they're doing, and eventually the public gets tired of them. Maybe there's some corruption, maybe it's just shelf life, and they get kicked out of office. And what ends up happening is the Conservatives then come in this country, and they're nothing more really than caretakers, because they more or less follow the same policy agenda that the Liberals have implemented. Maybe they slow things down a little bit. Maybe they roll things back a little bit in certain selected areas. And then what ends up happening is once the public's memory of whatever was upsetting them with the natural governing party of Canada or once that memory is gone, then they re-elect the Liberals. So this is what I'm saying is you're right. They're not losing because they're running on principle. So why do they lose? What's the reason they lose? It's all personality.
Yeah, it's too much. It's a very much pop culture, star power kind of a culture that is behind a lot of electoral successes. You could look at Obama and say that. You could look at Trudeau and say that. It's all sizzle. There's just not much stake there.
And nobody sizzled like Stephen Harper.
He didn't sizzle.
Oh, not even a little bit. So it's not just that. And Brian Mulroney didn't lose because he introduced the GST.
No.
It was people had enough of that show.
I agree with you.
The best government, right? It's so.
But I think Joseph's point overall is that, and I'm basing this on previous conversations, is that you can't win an argument you never start. You can't make a point you never enter into the conversation with. So in other words, if we as small c conservatives want to grow our brand, if I can use that phrase, in other words, attract more people to the conservative lifestyle, mindset, not political party per se, because that depends on who's running it and the kind of, whether are they a red Tory, the blue Tory, whatever they are. But I'm talking about people who care about things like smaller government, lower taxes, more personal responsibility, these kinds of things that are the core issues. Then we have to get out there and start having those conversations.
But and we're going way off topic and way down a rabbit hole here. But then why have a Conservative Party at all? What's the point of the Conservative Party if the Conservative Party is going to decline at the end of the day to be conservative?
Well,
and I think all too often that's happened. Now, and I think that is what happened to John Tory and Tim Hudak when the McGuinty Liberals it was time for a change, people were ready for a change, and they said, we don't want you.
Okay, so let me give you an analogy to understand where I'm going with this. If you have a container ship at sea and you want to make a 90-degree turn or a 180-degree turn, maybe the navigator's drunk and he's going the wrong way. Okay, set GPS and all that stuff aside. How long do you think it takes to turn that ship around? You put the helm order in, the rudder slams over to the left. How long before that ship is turned around?
No idea.
A very long time.
Right.
You got a lot of mass, you've got a lot of inertia, and you have to overcome that and use all the tools, including bow thrusters and everything you have, in order to change that huge block of steel and its momentum, inertia.
Okay, so what's your point?
The point is that you're right. What's the point? The reason we have a Conservative Party is to reflect conservative values, but you have to have the culture, the people who understand what those conservative values are at the helm to begin to make the change. In other words, we need to educate people on why conservatism matters and then encourage them to get into public office.
But again, my concern is that with the exception of Doug Ford, who appears to be following through. Now, he's more of a populist than a conservative, in fairness, but he is following through on those items he promised during the election.
Yes.
And my complaint is most conservative parties, federally and provincially,
don't do that.
Well, but they're conservative in opposition only.
It's easy then.
But once they become elected, or they think there's a possibility they might get elected, they move to the left. They become a liberal party.
Yeah. But that's what I mean by this. We have to have people who are willing to take the long game and implement it in order to swing that ship around. Because if they don't, this is the way things are going to be. It used to be that when somebody said, I am a conservative politician, you knew what that meant. Today, it means that right now, while I'm in opposition, I'll stand up and I'll say whatever I need to say, and man, I'll bash them liberals. But you're right. The moment they get elected, they move to the center. And Stephen Harper did it too. They all moved to the center because they figure that's where they have to govern from.
Well, it's not. It's not that they moved to the center when they're elected. They moved to the center, they went to the left before they're elected because they believe that that's the key to being elected.
And my argument is if we don't have people in positions of authority who are solid conservatives in not only name but in lifestyle, then we're never going to fix this problem. You're never going to give that helm order to swing the ship around and have somebody with the courage to stay with it while the ship turns. That's the whole point of the analogy.
Well, look, I'm just happy with what we're getting so far from the Ford government in Ontario. And I think there's a lesson to be learned. And the lesson to be learned is be bold, don't be afraid, nail your colors to your mast, run on what you really believe in. If you don't get elected, then you don't get elected. But that's what democracy is all about. That's what elections are all about. They're about choices.
Amen to that.
Tell people what you want to do. Be clear about it. And if you get elected, if you don't get elected, you don't get elected. If you do get elected, now you have a clear mandate, and you go ahead and do what you said you were going to do.
You can point to that.
And that's it.
You can point to Tanya and say the same thing. She was the one who stood up and said, these issues on which I will not bend, and advanced her agenda, even though she didn't get elected and she didn't form part of the government. What she wanted, she got. She got a review of at least the sex ed part, and a lot of her issues came forward and are now being implemented. She had a huge impact, even though she didn't win. She made the argument, and people listened.
Okay, there's that pregnant pause again.
Yep. I do try to let other people into the conversation.
I know, yeah. So, Trudeau, Trump, and trade.
Oh, man.
Now, was anyone else surprised, actually, by the announcement of a deal with the EU?
Everybody was surprised.
I was really surprised.
Who was expecting.
I was not. Not that you could knock me down with a feather, but I went like, really?
So what does the Prime Minister do now? What's the next move for the Prime Minister?
I think, it depends.
He picks up the red
think
phone.
The plan. I honestly think the plan is exactly what what Stephen Harper was saying a couple of weeks ago. Hold on to the puck, and we're 12 months away now from a federal election campaign. 12 months, 13 months away from a federal election campaign. And Trump is not popular in Canada, so run as the anti-Trump. But now that play now isn't there for them.
Much more problematic.
Yeah, it's much more problematic. So it's a real strategic problem for
I think
them.
the next thing he does is Trudeau has to pick up the red phone, call the White House, and say, "Okay, we need to get a deal. What do I have to do to get that done?"
But now, anything that he does is going to make him look weak.
But the longer it goes without doing anything makes him look even weaker.
Yeah, I get it.
He's in a no-win situation.
To a certain degree, I agree. You're right.
So the question is, has he got enough? Is there even a bone of humility in him that he'll swallow his pride and call the Prime President and say, look, I screwed it up in Quebec. This is the conversation as I understand it would go. He won't say it in this way, but I screwed this up in Quebec. I apologize for that, but we need to get a deal done. What do I need to do? And then President Trump will lay out what he wants, and Trudeau's going to have to say, yes, sir, sign off on it, and that's how he's going to save what little bacon he's got left.
Yep. Well, and I think he'll probably have to throw Gerald Butts or somebody under the bus.
Oh, thank God, please.
Well,
please let that happen.
That would be the Mr. President, I got bad advice from my chief of staff. I apologize. I got bad advice, and I fired him. Fired him for giving me bad advice. I'm really sorry. What can we do to make this up to you?
Yeah, will he get rid of Butts, though?
No,
I don't know.
No, he'll let the country burn before that happens.
Yeah. So in that way, he's burned his own petard. He's burned his own ships. There's no retreat, and he has painted himself into one hell of a corner.
Okay, we're going to take a final break, and we'll be back with half hour number 4 in a couple of minutes.
All right, you stay there. We'll be back with more right after this. Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. Joseph is sitting on one end of the table, I'm sitting on the other, and our guest, Mike Patton, the communications guru and Trump and Ford fan extraordinaire, are here with us. We're talking all things politic. And one of the things we were kind of just tossing around during the break, and I think it's a fascinating topic, is Stephen Harper, is he ready to make a comeback? And what would you think of that if he did? What does that say about Andrew Scheer's future as prime ministerial candidate? Like, if he doesn't win the next election, he's out, of course. But what role would Stephen Harper play? Would he want to be the leader again? I mean, what other role could he play? I mean, once you're prime minister, everything else is downhill, right? So how would he fit in?
Well, it's within a government. We saw this with Joe Clark. He went on to a very successful cabinet career after being leader. But I can't see Stephen Harper being interested in doing that. I think he still has a taste for it. And I think we're going to see him come back. Now, the question is, will it be before the next federal election or after the next federal election?
So you think Stephen Harper is going to try to make a comeback?
Yes.
As leader of the party and potentially a future prime minister?
Yes.
Well,
Okay,
it's not
unheard of. I get it. I'm not. But
Trudeau 1.0 did it.
I'm sure this is in his mind. The question is, it's like Napoleon returning. Do the armies?
There's a regrettable analogy.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. Not the analogy. I would have said Churchill returning.
Well, but still, what happened when Napoleon showed up is the armies that were sent to crush him all turned over to his side.
That's right.
And if Stephen Harper makes it known amongst the Conservative caucus that he's prepared to come back as leader, what do they do? Do they say hooray, or do they say not a chance?
That's a good question, because I don't have an answer for that.
My sense is, this is a really interesting subject. Fascinating. My sense is that the majority of members of the Conservative caucus would probably say, thanks, Stephen, but we prefer that you stay in retirement. But I think that the majority of members of the party would want him to come back. I think that there would be a clear divide between the caucus, the parliamentary caucus, and the establishment, if you will, in Ottawa, and rank-and-file party members. I think rank-and-file party members would have preferred that Stephen Harper didn't step down when he did, and I think that they would be prepared to welcome him back.
I think they'd welcome him back with open arms. I think there's a lot of people, even Liberals, who would rather Stephen Harper than what we have now. It's gotten to the point that Trudeau is looking more and more like a one-trick pony. Like, this will be his one shot at being prime minister, and after the next election, there's a very good chance, if he's still around, he'll be the opposition leader. And I can't see him staying on as that role after being a failed prime minister after only one term. So his days are, I won't say they're numbered, but the question is, assuming a Liberal loss, then I think that's the end of Justin Trudeau.
Well, he needs another term if he's going to step into his desired role of Secretary General of the United Nations.
Yeah, good luck with that.
But it's very interesting. If Stephen Harper starts to make it known amongst party members that he's prepared to come back, and Joseph's right, if caucus goes, that's not going to happen, and the membership gets
says
behind,
yes, it is.
Yes, it is. How does that shake out? Now,
that is.
I don't think there's enough time for that to happen before the next.
No, I don't think so. And I think Stephen's smarter than that.
Yeah, I don't think it happens.
But I think Andrew Scheer's life expectancy
drops dramatically
if he fails to win.
Yeah.
Is he does not have a whole lot of money in the bank as far as survival
political
goes.
capital. Yeah.
Yep.
This is why it's such an interesting conversation.
It really is. And to the best of my knowledge, we're actually the only ones, or certainly the first ones, to actually be talking about this openly. But I've heard this from other people, I have heard from other people, within the party, sort of musing about it and going, gosh, we wish that Stephen was still here. And it's not just about Andrew Scheer. Let me just make that clear. It's not that people are going, oh, Andrew Scheer is doing such a terrible job. Although, I've run across a lot of people who supported Andrew Scheer in the leadership who are sort of scratching their heads and going, I'm not really sure what's going on. I don't get a sense of a lot of activity and that within the party itself. Well, I don't know whether that's fair or not, but there is some of that kind of talk going on. I don't know. It's really quite interesting.
Well, when you look at Andrew, let's look at the two personalities in under discussion here under the microscope. On one hand, you have Andrew Scheer, the perpetual smiler. I mean, the man never doesn't have a smile on his face, which is fine. Like, I don't hold it against him, but that's just who he is, okay? And he's pretty good in question period. I've heard him really, although, to be fair, it's not hard to zing the Liberals. I mean, to score political debating points against the Liberals is something any high schooler could do right now. They're just that easy a target. I think who's far better at it is Pierre Poilievre. When you watch the way he conducts himself, Michelle Rempel is excellent. So you've got a bunch of really good people in the front benches poking holes in Liberals on a daily basis. But when you look at from a statesman point of view, who would you rather have as prime minister representing us on the world stage, and you contrast Andrew Scheer with Stephen Harper, I think Stephen Harper, it isn't even close. I mean, when you look at his stand in Ukraine, when you look at his trip to Washington, when you look at the different times he's represented Canada on the international stage, he's one of the world's great statesmen in the last, let's say, 30 or 40 years, and represents Canada extremely well.
Yeah, and on trade, which is, the overriding issue right now, the truth is he's the guy. He's the man.
Well, I think he's done more for Canada by that trip to Washington than Trudeau has ever done.
Well, I think that's an overstatement. But,
all right, I'm prone to those.
But is Justin Trudeau, is Prime Minister Trudeau smart enough then to make Stephen Harper his special envoy on trade to Donald Trump?
Not a snowball's chance in a blast furnace.
Now, you see, that would be a smart move.
He won't do it.
Right?
Because he'll neutralizes Stephen Harper, uses him to his advantage. Probably hurts,
like, what does Andrew Scheer say about
Scheer
that?
too.
I think if I'm Harper, I turn that down. Because I don't want to be played.
Well, it's not about being played.
But,
it's about putting the country first.
Yeah, how is he being
Stephen
played
Harper
if he
would
does
take that in a heartbeat, because the same way Brian Mulroney has been involved on this file, because he's prepared to put the country first above political gamesmanship.
Yeah, and you can imagine the uproar that would ensue if Justin Trudeau called Stephen Harper and said, "I want you to be my special trade envoy," and Stephen turned him down, and then Trudeau went and made that public.
Okay, fair enough.
I think that would really hurt Harper.
I grant that. I hear the logic in that. But I don't think there's a snowball's chance in a blast furnace that phone call ever happens. There's no way Justin Trudeau would ever call Stephen Harper and ask him for a dime, never mind to become one of the most important figures in modern Canadian political history in the last 5 or 10 years. Not going to happen.
Well, he'd be smart if he did it.
Yeah, but he's not smart.
But he would be smart if he did it.
Yes, he did. But if he was smart, he never would have blown the thing up with Trump in the first place.
That's true.
And he wouldn't need Stephen Harper.
That's true.
So here's a question. Speaking of Stephen Harper, what role in this government has Jean Chrétien had?
In this government?
Yes.
Are you talking about behind the scenes?
Well, no, publicly.
None that I know of.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything that Jean Chrétien is involved in.
I don't recall.
He hasn't said a word.
Well, and the Prime Minister hasn't asked him for anything
right.
either.
Because you could use Jean Chrétien in the same role.
Well, maybe or maybe not, but he hasn't used him in any role. Like,
That's
why
true.
would you not? Like, I think Paul Martin has done some stuff.
Yeah, but Paul Martin didn't have the pizzazz that Chrétien did.
But I'm saying he's done some stuff, so he's been asked.
Yeah.
What about Jean Chrétien? Isn't that interesting that we haven't heard anything about him in connection to this government?
I don't know that I'm that surprised about it. Chrétien is quite old. I don't know what his age is, but
he must be almost 80 by now, I would think.
He's not a young man.
So you think it's a health thing?
Well, no, I just not sure that they see a role for him.
I got to come back to the idea that, look, you're talking about somebody who is unfortunately the Prime Minister I'm not doubting the validity of the Prime Ministership. He was elected fair and square in an election. I get that. The voters spoke. Here's what we got. But when it comes to how he deals with it, look at the India trip. Complete and total fiasco from beginning to end.
Yeah, that was pretty farcical.
It was a joke. It was absolutely embarrassing. So if he's not bright enough to figure out when you go there, you don't act like a tourist. You're not a private citizen taking the wife and kids to a jaunt to India. You represent a sovereign nation, and you have to show the proper marks of respect. I mean, yeah, you can wear the headdress. A lot of people do that. Like even Harper wore, when he went to India, wore not a hijab, but whatever. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but whatever the traditional headdress is of India.
Well,
but just
there's no traditional headdress of India.
I suppose
when he went to a Sikh temple, he covered his head.
That's what I was trying to say.
Like that's not.
He's showing a certain amount of respect
for. Do, right?
That's right. It's like taking
that's not wearing the full Bollywood.
Precisely.
Outfit. I'm still waiting for the first foreign leader to come and visit Canada dressed as a lumberjack.
I know. or a voyageur.
I think that would be so funny.
That would be hilarious.
That would show some real
some chutzpah.
Now chutzpah. You got to get the pronunciation right.
Okay, if I'm going to use the word, I better get it right.
Okay, so this is actually quite interesting because in terms of buffoonery, surely to goodness, everything that Justin Trudeau did on that India trip is on the same level of the sort of buffoonery that's attached to Donald Trump. And yet nobody really, he never really suffered any kind of consequences.
Yeah, but Trump does something that Trudeau doesn't. He gets results.
No,
what came out of the India trip?
No, I understand, but you see the
embarrassment.
Point.
That.
But you understand the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that, if Donald Trump had posed with, his family in those gowns or whatever and headdress and not just that. I mean, it wasn't just that they were wearing this traditional garb. Right. It was the pose, with the whole family standing there with the
one foot,
their hands clasped. It was, I mean, if Donald Trump had done something like that, the Canadians, forget about Americans, Canadians would have exploded with ridicule and invective and calling him names.
Well, they do that anyway.
But you see what I'm saying is I just think that isn't it fascinating how Canadians care more about American politics?
Yeah, that's a
Canadian
good point.
Politics,
but again, my point is though about all of that is if he's not smart enough to see the pitfalls in that, there's no way he's smart enough to connect the dots and say Stephen Harper should be my man.
Okay, what about people around him?
That's it. He doesn't have to be smart enough, right?
But he's not listening.
The world is cursed by smart politicians. That you don't need to be smart. You need to have smart people around you.
Okay, so what's the problem with Team Trudeau?
Well, obviously, he's either not listening or they're worse than he is.
Or as bad.
Or at least as bad.
Well, and I think you might have hit on something because, and I've seen this happen before, is that a politician will get elected following the advice of really smart people.
Giving really bad advice.
Well, no, they'll get elected by smart people giving them good advice, and they'll follow the good advice, and after a while they think it was all them. So they stop listening to the good advice.
Fair enough.
And they just start doing what they want to do.
Forget why they brought them on in the first place.
Yeah, like it's like, no, I got this. Stop telling me what to do. I'm Prime Minister now. Stop bossing me around. You're not the boss of me. I'm Prime Minister.
Am.
And so I think that could certainly be part of it.
You very well could be right, but that does not bode well for him making the right choice about who this international envoy should be on trade. I agree with you. I think that Stephen Harper, now whether Stephen Harper will take it, you're probably right, he would, because he cares more about the country than he does about any political party. That's obvious. So, okay, let's grant that Stephen Harper would take that phone call and the job if it came. It's never going to come. Because if it was going to come, first of all, if he was smart enough to figure that out, he never would have blew the deal in the first place with Trump. That's number one. Number two, he's not getting good advice, and even if he is, he's not listening to it. So therefore, he's not He hates anything starting with the letter C. If it's a political party, forget it. He wants nothing to do with it, and he will not swallow his pride and hire a conservative former prime minister. Just not going to happen. If he did that, I'd fall out of my chair. And I'd actually have to give him credit for it, and I don't want to do that.
It's funny you said that because, I jumped into my office chair today and this afternoon, and it broke.
Maybe that phone call did take place. They just haven't announced it yet.
Yeah. The wheel broke right off of it.
Oh, my Lord.
I know.
Well, so that's my attitude about that, because I hear what you're saying, Mike. I think you're exactly right, and that's probably what kills a lot of governments too, is they stop listening to the smart people they hire.
Well, or what happens? The smart people get frustrated and move on,
because they were not being listened to.
Well, and they're replaced by sycophants who
Yes,
aren't
ma'am.
Smart, but are great. Are great at kissing up.
Yeah, they're very good shite polishers.
And that's sometimes what's most in demand by a leader.
That might have been what happened to our good friend, not Hudak, Brown.
Patrick Brown?
Yep.
No, that's not what happened to Patrick Brown.
Well, who else?
He had some urges.
Did he?
I think.
No, but I mean, as far as, to me, the kiss of death for him.
Alleged urges.
Alleged urges, yes. But the
the urges were real. It was whether it was inappropriate urges that was alleged.
Because if he'd have carried on with the idea of supporting a carbon trade tax, I don't think they'd have won that election.
But that's not what did him in.
I thought well, if it hadn't been the allegations, it would have been that.
Because I believe Caucus bought into his theory that if we continue to fight on the carbon tax, that'll be the defining issue of the election and we'll lose. So let's just agree to it and throw it off the table and leave the Liberals with nothing. That was his theory.
Well, that sure blew up in his face.
Well, see, that's not what blew up in his face. It was general inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, I'm not denying that. But what I am saying is that, set that aside, he would have lost anyway.
Well, perhaps. But the moral of the story is, as leader, you can't be a jerk. Because at the end of the day, what really got him in trouble was he was a jerk.
Yeah.
And the moment there was blood in the water and there was a problem, everybody just jumped on him with the knives.
And they certainly
wasted no time.
Brutus
It
to
was
his
shocking.
Caesar.
It was shocking how quick that happened.
Yeah.
And that was not because he was much loved.
No, obviously, because it wouldn't have happened if he was. Anyway, so that's...
He's running. Now, Patrick Brown is running for office. Where is he running? Is he
He's
running not
for
for
some
mayor?
kind
He's
of
running
municipal
for council,
chair.
right? City council where?
Where's he from?
Barrie.
That's where it's...
Regional chair.
That's it, regional chair.
Regional chair? Do they have regional chair there?
Yep.
Apparently. There's probably only one, and he sits in it by himself in the corner, but...
Yeah, he'll probably win,
Probably. But you know what? That might be the best place for him.
Patrick Brown, part deux.
Oh, God.
So can you imagine in his role of as regional chair going to Doug Ford and saying, here's my laundry list of things I want?
Yeah, and I can hear Doug Ford going, now you know what it is to want. But can you imagine the movie 50 Shades of Brown?
Oh, dear.
Oh, God. I don't know. I believe
You
I
better
just
be
said
careful. I mean, you're going to be sued for $3 million or something like that.
Something about blood and a stone come to mind.
Your blood and a stone.
Yeah. Anyway, there is one last topic I think we should just touch on as we get towards the top of the show, and that's Doug Ford's next big promise on the campaign was to lower the price of gas by 10 cents. Now,
yes.
That's one thing he hasn't moved on yet that I've noticed.
And I don't think that he has to do that legislatively. That could be an order in council, if I'm not mistaken.
So he could do that relatively quickly.
Because you can see with taxes, you have legislation to authorize you to implement a tax.
But they don't force you to implement the tax.
That's right. So once the enabling legislation is in place, you can raise the tax or lower the tax without legislation.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is. You would think it'd be the other way around.
Yeah, no, you can if it's like the GST. With the GST, the law is that we have a GST, a goods and service tax, federal sales tax, right?
Right.
So once that law is in place, then you don't have to go back to the legislature
to raise or lower
raise it or lower it, right?
Well, so he could bring it down to 10%.
He should be able to do it. I'm curious.
I'm talking about the HST now.
I'm curious. Well, that's he never talked about that.
I know.
But that's a huge. When we went to the HST in Ontario,
yep.
that was a huge tax grab.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the PST, remember, was not applied on a whole range of
all your
transactions
food, all your
that had nothing.
personal products,
Yeah.
female hygienic products. None of that was taxed.
I would be very much in favor of lowering the tax, but as you know, as we were talking about earlier, away from the show, there's always the concern that you want to find savings somewhere to be able to.
Let's talk about it as it applies to the gas tax. To me, okay, so let's say the gas at the time he does it is $1.20. Takes 10 cents off, it's $1.10. That makes a huge difference to a lot of people who go through everybody from service providers to contractors to transportation companies to taxis, everybody.
Here's the thing. If you were to cut the HST, if you were to cut the provincial portion of the HST by 1 or 2 points,
right,
then I think that would spur consumer spending, and you probably would end up seeing, if not a recovery of the revenue that you lose, in total,
right,
a significant amount. I don't really think it's going to make that much of a difference to the economy to cut the gas tax. I think it's going to be very popular, but people drive, and I don't think that people are going to drive more.
No, but what it will do is for the same number of miles, because let's say a transportation company drives a certain, if he's got a fleet of 10 trucks and each truck does 10,000 miles a week, okay,
right.
A month, 10,000 miles a month times 10 trucks,
it
that's a
certainly
lot
helps
of fuel.
The bottom line.
Okay,
absolutely.
So what that does though is that leaves him a huge pot of money that he can either put another truck on the road or hire another driver. This is where the trickle down takes place, right?
I don't agree with that, Nick. I tell you, we don't have time. I've got a great story to tell you about back when the NDP was helping people hire people.
Yeah, but that's the wrong way about it, though.
No, but you don't hire people. The reason you don't hire people is not because you don't have money. If you all of a sudden come into money in business, you don't all of a sudden go, okay, great, I can put another 10 trucks on the road because I've got the money to do it. The question is the business there for you?
Okay, fair enough.
Okay?
But now you've got the resources to go out and look for new clients, develop the business so that you can hire the trucks.
But the bottom line is, if the business was there, I would be able to go out and get the money to finance that anyway.
My logic is let's make it easier, not harder.
Yeah, okay, well, fair enough. Listen, and again, it sounds like I'm saying don't cut the gas tax.
Believe me, I want to cut the gas tax.
Look forward to the gas tax being cut.
You're looking forward to it.
I am, and it's not just private sector firms, but do you know what the impact would be to the city of Ottawa?
Well,
do you know how many vehicles they have on the road?
Oh yeah, they're a huge fleet.
Huge fleet.
Think of
OC
Toronto.
Transpo, police, fire, paramedics, City of Toronto. That's a lot of money.
Even in my little community of Killaloo, they've got, I don't know, let's say 24 vehicles in their fleet, fire trucks and municipal garbage trucks and so on. Okay, they go through, I'm guessing, I don't know, $25,000 a year in gas. You cut that by 10 cents a liter or 45 cents a gallon. That's a huge difference.
Okay, so here's my question. Why should governments be paying taxes to other levels of government in the first place?
That's another good question. That's just, that's the sticky figures of government.
I get that the city of Ottawa would save an immense amount of money, and any large municipality is going to save a lot of money by cutting the gas tax. But it begs the question: why are municipalities paying
gas tax in the
first place?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like, why are we charging people who work for the federal government income tax? Why don't we just pay them a set fee for their services and say you don't have to file an income tax return?
Yeah, you could if you paid everybody exactly the same amount, so their take home pay would stay the same, but now it would be their gross pay as opposed to their net pay.
Right.
And you completely eliminate income tax for public servants.
Right.
It wouldn't make a difference to the Treasury.
But it would make a big difference to the people who now don't have to go through the hassle of going through and getting their T4 and all that other nonsense.
Sure.
So, anyway, we are out of time.
Well, we're getting close to being out of time. So, Mike, thanks for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Okay. And
we even let him get a word or two in advice.
A word or two.
Well, he squeezed in a little bit here and there. So, send us your comments at the comments at thecombatzone.ca. And don't forget to, once we're online, share this with your friends. And we'll see you next week.